And shul is not a hostile audience. They want you to succeed. They're on your side. They want you to succeed. Do them a chesed and make it a really enjoyable speech, because everybody wants to enjoy a speech. Nobody's looking for you to trip up.
Rabbi Shaul Robinson is the senior rabbi at Lincoln Square Synagogue in New York City. Rabbi Robinson is unique in the sense that he entered the rabbinate without a preconceived notion of how a pulpit rabbi should speak.
And I didn't grow up particularly going to shul. So I didn't ever have a model of the rabbi that I was trying to emulate or imitate.
Rabbi Robinson's career began on campus as an outreach professional, where he transformed lives through his informal conversation.
By and large, the experiences I had being a campus rabbi, being more or less peers, and really seeking to cultivate friendship rather than employee-employer or rabbi-balabatim model was gold, was really, really, really important to me.
And that tone and style of speaking has always been the ideal for him, even nowadays when he has to deliver more formal presentations. In this informative episode of the Maggid Method, we talk about the golden standard you should aim for anytime you get up to speak.
It's maybe one of the most important things that you can convey to any audience. I care about this, and I hope I can show you that you should care about this as well.
The need for authenticity in presentation.
Never fake emotion. That line they say, sincerity, if you can fake it, you can fake anything, whatever. You can't fake authenticity. I'm occasionally asked to speak as a fundraiser for some event and whatever. I find myself getting so convinced of the importance of this cause that I want to write a check myself. I don't think you can speak any other way.
And the mindset that everything you need to speak about on a given Shabbos can be found in the Parsha.
You have to believe that everything is in the Parsha. There's no question about it. And anything that you need to talk about the coming week, anything that in the news that is important, whatever, you will find in the Parsha because it's there, and you just have to look for it.
We also talk about the hazard of inadvertently alienating a portion of your congregation with your message.
Whatever I am talking about from an ethical, moral high horse, somebody else who's done nothing wrong needs a hug, an embrace, and support, and not harangue. You gotta choose very wisely and carefully.
I learned so much from my conversation with Rabbi Shaul Robinson, and I'm sure you will too. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Rabbi Shaul Robinson. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for making the time. I appreciate it. I know you're busy, and you just got back from your trip from Israel.
Sure, my pleasure.
So my first question is, while I was doing my homework, I noticed that you were first a college rabbi, a campus rabbi.
Correct.
And then you transitioned into a full-time rabbi, at a part-time, then full-time at the Barnett Synagogue.
And in London, Barnett, correct.
Yeah. So I'm curious with your perception, what's the difference between speaking to college students versus adults? Do you approach that differently?
Well, first of all, I'm going to put a little bit of this is now almost ancient history, actually, because I've been at Lincoln Square for 18 years.
Yeah.
Interviewed for the position 19 years ago, and Cambridge was a whole 10 years before that. So I'm actually shocked to talk about how far back that is, and it's time for you to even think that it might be relevant. When I was much younger in the pulpit, I really thought that the rabbinate, there was very little, one generation, very little to teach. The old generation was the arrogance of youth, or whatever. I will say, actually, and I'll start even a step before that. I was an active campus activist, which is somewhat different now with current war. Student activism here in America has become much more of a thing, but student-led activities in the UK, Jewish student activities, were always student-led rather than professional-led. So I really became a Jewish activist on campus. And
can I ask you, when you say activist, do you mean you mean like you ran activities?
Yeah, so I actually was very involved in the Union of Jewish Students, which doesn't really have a cognate here because it's very different from a hill or whatever, but students were basically planning and running their own activities. And I really became, for the first time in my life, really became engaged in organized Jewish life on campus.
Mm-hmm.
Subsequently, as a result, became religious during that period as well. So that was, so I was a campus rabbi, having been a sort of a campus leader before I became a rabbi, and I didn't grow up particularly going to shul, so I didn't ever have a model of the rabbi that I was trying to emulate or imitate. And many people tell me that, when my rabbi growing up spoke, I thought I was, listening to God himself speak, or was I had neither pole. And all I had was kind of my own experience of being sort of, a much more kind of informal kind of speaker. And even now at Lincoln Square, after 20 years, even though I can give full court drashat and sometimes with great passion, whatever, they're always informal to a certain extent. So I was trying to, just communicate with people, talk to people. Even a place like Cambridge University, the speech was much more sort of a devar Torah. When I speak in shul now, and I know we're going to go back and forth between the two experiences, my speech is Friday night tend to be very different from my speeches Shabbat morning, not just because they're shorter, but there's a sort of different sort of tenor and vibe, whatever. In many ways, I much prefer speaking on Friday night because it's got a casual, I'm not making a demand from an audience. Sit down, here's the message. It's more, I just want to share with you the following idea in the parsha, whatever. So that was very much kind of the first step in my kind of drasha experience. And if I must say, it's an excellent question because that really was the sort of the baseline for me. And as an aside, because I know some people are listening to this are involved in other aspects of the rabbinate than just merely speaking, which of course is an important and public-facing part of the rabbinate. Maybe it's a sales division of the rabbinate, but it's it's by no means the entire job. By and large, the experiences I had being a campus rabbi, being more or less peers, slightly older than the congregation, than the constituency, and really seeking to cultivate friendship rather than employer, or rabbi balabatim model was gold, was really, really, really important to me, and is still extremely important to me. So all sorts of ways, I am so blessed that my first exposure to the rabbinate was on campus, which as it happens to be why I encourage rabbinic interns or anybody else who will listen to me, and they rarely do, to take up positions with JLIC if they're available. I think it's the best possible start to a rabbinic career. But anyway, so to answer your question, there are big differences between how drashot go down on campus and how they typically go down on shul, and I've tried to stay as close or as true to that campus model, even in very different circumstances decades later.
So, what are some of the things that you do in order to accomplish that? Because it's a fine balance, walking between being formal, being authentic, and like a peer, as you say. What are some of the ways that you toe that line?
I think it's important to be kind of, and again, whether or not this is just, it's hard to be, I wouldn't necessarily be able to trace all of these things specifically back, but they clearly contain echoes even, many years later. I try and be, even when I'm giving a formal speech, and sometimes formal speeches are important. After October 7th, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, actually, I'm sure we'll come back to this, are my least favorite time of drashot. Even the shul is fullest. There's too many expectations, or too much sort of, the full, there's too much weight placed on the rabbi's speech, whatever.
Right,
and even
people are coming to hear what you're going to say.
Not even coming to hear. It's just like, it gets blown out of proportion, and there's too much weight or hanging on it, whatever. But even plenty of occasions, either a significant simcha, we want to be really direct and talk about, there's a specific message that you want to get across, whatever it is. And certainly, just for example, in recent months, about the war, almost every Shabbat has been something important and a challenge, a mission to channel and reflect what people are feeling and lift. And we'll talk about all of that, whatever. Even amongst all of that, I try and go off script. even when there's a script. I try and grow off script and allow informality, even to touch back to something we were saying right at the very beginning, even to be humorous, not inappropriately humorous, but sometimes the release of a laugh, or you kind of create this sort of meta message. The rabbi is speaking, but we're also kidding around. We're also, we're doing this, but we're also self-aware, all of us, to know that, this is not just, this is more than just a rabbi giving a speech, kind of all in this together, whatever. And so that informality and that kind of, you know, common ground and shared common ground. The pulpit can be a massive barrier. Of course, it can be, literally them and us. And in education, in almost no other educational setting, do we encourage such formal, certainly in, Jewish informal education, encourage such, any other class that a rabbi gives or anybody gives in shul, if it's not a chavuta, there's at least an opportunity to raise questions. Very, very rarely is it literally, I'm talking down to you. So, and there are some shuls that make the point. I tried it once or twice, didn't really work, of having like a talk back or Q&A at the end of a drosha or what have you. It doesn't tend to work. But some or other communicating that this is, if this has to be, this is what it is, it's a drosha, I'm speaking to you, but there's some kind of commonality between us. So, and I don't talk about sport. I don't talk about popular culture because I know nothing about them, but I'll try and bring in, sort of the common touch, and I'll be self-aware enough, or try to be self-aware enough, and hopefully not pompous enough to say that after speaking for so long, I feel that I'm relatively talented at giving public speeches. Enough people have told me that, and I feel it myself, whatever, to be able to draw some observations, whatever. Sometimes I just sort of know when it needs, even a serious point, needs a little joke or an aside or whatever, just to kind of lower to get people to sort of, take a break and then lean back in again, what have you. And and again, that kind of informality. I think if I'd started off in a very formal, stuffy British synagogue, so then, then that would have been, harder. I used to always start my drushes, by the way, even in the UK, with a joke. And I would spend more time looking up the parsha, more time than I was on the parsha, looking for the great opening joke, whatever. And then I sort of, grew out of that a little bit and just started dropping in little kind of personal witticisms that seem to be much more, much more, funnier, and also much more, kind of much more relatable. And actually, somebody actually said, Rabbi, it's much better when you, you're trying to drop in these laugh lines to the drosha than when you're kind of saying, okay, here's the funny bits, and now here's the speech. Just,
right. It's more organic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you transition from I guess when you were the part-time rabbi, that the first time you started giving the formal drushas? Is that when you?
Yeah, I'd taken opportunities when visiting my wife's family, time to time as a smicha student, and I learned in Israel, but the UK is not that far. So on all our trips, I would seek out opportunities to speak in UK pulpits from time to time. So I'd probably given maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 drushas over the, in shuls, whatever. And again, looking back now, kind of achingly, formal, or kind of stiff, or kind of not so relatable, whatever. But we've all got to start somewhere.
Sure. Who was your model? Who was your? Did you look to Rabbi Sachs? Did you look to?
So Rabbi Sachs became chief rabbi while I was in smicha. So I never actually got the opportunity of hearing of being in shul. I don't recall a single occasion where I ever was in the shul where Rabbi Sachs was officiating, and therefore gave the drosha. Actually, now first time I ever thought about the answer to that question. Later on, of course, as he began giving drosha. So really, if anything, my model actually was, and I think this might be where some of my sort of particular kind of brand of humor came from. Actually, was so my yeshiva teachers really were the model. I learned at Yeshiva HaMivtar in Efrat. Rabbi Riskin has an ability to hold an audience, and his uses of just to be kind of reflective about public speaking, and very very early on in the rabbinate. In my smicha studies, and I did a practical rabbinics program as well, which we'll talk about as well. The lessons there about homiletics were extremely useful. But Rabbi Riskin has an ability to hold an audience as much sometimes with his use of pauses and this utter sense of conviction or believability, authenticity that is really kind of extraordinary. And I've heard rabbis that very almost seem to be little Rabbi Riskin kind of imitators. Sounds very dismissive and panic. I can well understand the temptation, whatever, so I've tried not
you
to.
could see the influence. You could
See the influence almost in the mannerisms, what have you. And I've tried not to do that. But the ability of Rabbi Riskin to speak with utter conviction and with tremendous movement and with skill, in other words, the specific things that he does that are extremely effective. And I learned years and years and years ago that public speaking is something that you could actually learn. And also Rabbi Bromender, a very different figure, but the way that he would speak and indeed use humor, sometimes disarmingly, when he would give sichot or shir klali in yeshiva, was also, really, really tremendous. So my real models in terms of how to speak were these kind of figures more in the Bet Midrash. Even though Rabbi Riskin was obviously pulpit rabbi, from my perspective as a Talmid at Yeshivat HaMiftar, he was a yeshiva teacher. I had the Bet Midrash perspective. He would teach public speaking as well, and he would teach it sort of magnificently, and he would teach an ability to sort of move people. There was an ability, and I think it's you never can. You can never fake emotion. That line they say, sincerity. If you can fake it, you can fake. You can fake anything, whatever. You can't fake authenticity. A speaker will often move themselves, will allow themselves to be moved and convinced by their own words. I often have that if I'm speaking at a parlor meeting, which I am occasionally asked to speak as a fundraiser for some event or whatever. I find myself getting so convinced of the importance of this cause that I want to write a check myself. I don't think you can speak any other way other than finding a point at which you are absolutely willing to die in that particular hill and then tell other people. So that was one of the things that Rabbi Riskin had, this extraordinarily sort of believable, tangible sense of believability, of authenticity. This is something which he, personally felt and saw, and it was an invitation to see the world and his conviction the way that he saw it. At some point, decades ago, and it's funny actually, you invited me on, and I'm not very reflective about public speaking. I do it so often that I don't really think about technique. If you were to ask me, techniques, etc., I would have nothing to say. But in this conversation, I remember now a book that I read decades ago when I was newly married and in Kollel in Efrat, called Her Master's Voice. I think it's called Her Master's Voice, Their Master's Voice. It was basically how they took Margaret Thatcher, who was really not just had the fact that she was a woman going against her in terms of politics at the time, but was regarded, and her tone of voice and her speeches were rather kind of shrill and wooden and kind of unrelatable. She was a conviction politician, but didn't speak in a way that was relatable. You felt you were being kind of harangued, or rather than talked to. And there was a deliberate project by her advisors to turn her into a great public speaker, which she was. And this book was about how they did it. It was written by some of the people on that team. And they spoke about specific techniques about how, conviction politicians, use threes, patterns of three, Churchill, there's specific things you can do. You give a list of, you don't say four things, you don't say two things, you say three things. The use of a pause, the use of a refrain, etc. And those are things which I gradually was able to integrate now to the point that I don't think about them, but I sort of, have, somehow or other absorbed them enough to be able to need. So public speaking can actually be taught. It really can be taught, and I learned it, and I think I learned it and then practiced it. You know, with some degree of success.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the greatest teacher is the stage. So you do
Yeah,
it week in and week
yeah.
out. No one. I always say no one except maybe rabbis and comedians speak as often as in order to engage and transform an audience, for different purposes. But that consistency will just drill it
Our
into
late
you.
Chazan Sherwood Goffin, all of a sudden used to tell me that opera singers were in awe of Chazanim because an opera
I've heard
singer
that.
over the course of an evening might sing totally for, I don't know, 45 minutes, an hour, but nobody like a Chazan and Yom Kippur, nobody, does that. So yeah, I guess our
Yeah.
stages are important stages.
So tell me some of the other things that you learned. You were saying you took homiletics. What kind of things do they teach you?
So, the ability to project, the ability to, again, to sort of be relatable, to speak from the point of view of I remember I did a Sha'al, back in the day, Shalavim Yeshiva used to have, I didn't study at Shalavim, but Shalavim had a practical rabbinics program that I don't think exists anymore, but they had a program, it was great, and they had various teachers, and, you'd get every week, somebody else would give a drosha, and everybody else would sort of criticize it. And then Rothschild Foundation had a program actually preparing Israeli rabbis to go to shlichus. That was in Hebrew actually, but a number of us of English speakers were on it as well. I remember one guy just sort of crashed the speech. We had to give a model address under the chuppah. So I started off by saying, the Gemara says this. Why does the Gemara say this? Well, Rashi said, and he just got up and he said, "It's a chuppah. Who cares what Rashi says? Who cares what Tosfos says? Tells and I was just like, it was very direct. What am I doing here? I'm trying to display my knowledge. That's not what I try and do in my drashot. I don't try and show off any kind of rhetorical flourishes, whatever. I'm not trying to move people. I will often, and we'll actually talk about peacetime drashas and wartime drashas, whatever. When I say wartime, I mean COVID and crisis and where we are right now, where the drasha has a very specific sense. And quote unquote peacetime, when I try not to talk about politics, I'm certainly not angling into the New York Times or looking to stir up controversy. I'll try and say something which I think is fascinating and interesting and show. I won't just sort of try and tick off, Rashi says this, Tosfos says this, Forno says this. Ultimately, I think the Ibn Ezra's got it. I'm going to give a drosha like that. That's not what I'm trying to do. But I'm trying to convey a kind of a love or passion or enthusiasm. I and that's something which I think, whether that came from homiletic classes or not, something which has sort of developed over the years. There was a sort of an attempt to sort of remind people that you have to, know your audience and speak to them. Sometimes rabbis and communities talking past each other. The UK, I hope not too many people in the UK listen to this, but I always found it very, very difficult. The reason why I uprooted my family and moved to America, apart from the professional opportunity, the ability to bring up our kids in the US was something wonderful. Was, in the UK, I just had a sense of the audience. I wanted to teach Torah. I wanted to speak about Torah, not just in the drashas, but shiurim, etc. And there was an audience who had been led to believe that Torah wasn't for them. But no matter what you would say, it wasn't really something that people were listening to. And so I'm blessed with an amazing community. I'm blessed to be able to speak to people on a Shabbat and other times as well who want to hear what I have to say. And that is, the greatest gift and does half my work for me. And that's incredible. For rabbis who are places for whom people need to be convinced, encouraged to know that, this is important. I need to tell you about it. This you've got to believe what you've got to know what I just learned in this book. It's important. You need to understand it. Not be able to get past that gap. And we all kind of get a sense sometimes of communities that, whether young, doesn't have to be rabbi, old rabbi, a tremendous sense of frustration. I remember once now, I spoke in South Africa a few years ago for the rabbinic conference, and one of the things I spoke about was Rashad. remember once hearing once about it must have been on one of these practical rabbinic programs. I don't remember where, but kind of a tragedy of a rabbi in a community who have nothing really in common. The rabbi is talking about what's important to him, but it's not that important to them. And what's important to them is not that important to him. And there's a kind of like a tragedy. It's kind of like a loveless marriage or something like that. So that really is it is sad because rabbis have messages that they want to say, and you don't have to whom to say it. It can be very, very difficult. So I'm extraordinarily blessed that I have people that I am, that are interested in, for some reason or other, the way sometimes my, half-baked theories on a parsha, or what have you, people are kind of interested in saying it. And I don't want to be too free-form about it and allow you to say questions, whatever, but I think one of them, I'll take this opportunity to say this just in case it slips my mind later on. Recently on a mission in Israel, two missions, in fact. One we led from the shul, and I said to my wife, my wife didn't come on the mission, but I said to her before we go, I've made I'm trying to think very carefully about what my role should be as the rabbi on the shul mission to Israel. And I developed a particular, thing. I didn't want to be camp, bus cheerleader. And I decided I was going to inhabit a very rabbinic role. That everywhere we would go, I would offer to say Tehillim or Kelmali Rachamim or meeting with families of Chatufim to say a prayer for Chizuk with them. And I was going to try and give the whole group a kind of like a spiritual element or release valve. But I wasn't going to be the tour guide in the sense that, and I remember, and it's kind of just, I only share with this, I'm very rarely so reflective, and it kind of surprised myself. The insight surprised me. But much of what rabbis do is explaining to people why they should care about something. It's Parshas Tazria Mitzorah. I don't care about Parshas Tazria Mitzorah. Here's why you should care. Here's why you should care about this. I'm communicating sort of a relevance or a care. You need to, you should care about this. So going on an Israel mission, it wasn't my job to be the interface between the people and Israel. Particularly right now, is telling its own story. People are affected and moved in different ways. If everybody was coming to shul so versed in the parsha that for me, I love parshas where we have to Yitro. I love that's Forno and Mamlechet Kohanim. That's my thing. Me, the Ramban on Anochi. If everybody was coming fired up with their own, I love this week's parsha because this is my point of relevance. So then, you wouldn't need a drosha. But a drosha, to a certain extent, is an ability to convey the enthusiasm. One of the greatest, when I announced I was leaving my shul in London to come to America, one of the greatest compliments I got was from a guy who came to shul maybe 10, 12 times a year. He said, I've never known somebody who clearly loves Judaism as much as you do. Whether they would still say the same thing, I don't know. But it was such a compliment because what he was really reflecting was that whatever he didn't necessarily understand of it, I'm sure he didn't understand what the subtleties of the point that I was trying to make, but it was clearly important to me. And that's maybe one of the most important things that you can convey to any audience. I care about this, and I hope I can show you that you should care about this as well. Lots of free association there. So let me get back
wonderful. to you. Now, I'm so curious. So how do you take, like, let's use your example, Tazria Mitzorah, very esoteric topic, nothing relevant, seemingly on the surface relevant today. What's your access point to find some point of relevancy that gets them invested in? Do you look for a transformative message that may be a contemporary message out of it? Where do you start?
I don't know where I start every week, and I've been doing this so long that sometimes I'm so excited that I've got something new to say. And then I tend not to, I write my droshes, actually, since COVID, I write them a lot less. But I normally get up and speak with some kind of notes in front of me, and then I'll look back on my, Google Drive, and I'll find, actually, I spoke about this medrash that I was so excited about this year. I knew that medrash 5 years ago, completely forgot about it. I'm not saying I gave exactly the same drosha, and it's kind of crushing that people don't remember that you said the same thing 5 years ago, whatever. But sometimes, life takes you back in a circle, whatever. I once heard from Rabbi Riskin, and it is true, that you have to believe that everything is in the parsha. You have to believe everything's in the parsha. There's no question about it, and he's correct.
Everything in a specific parsha, or
everything that you want to talk about in the, I beg your pardon, anything that you need to talk about in the coming week, anything that in the news that is important, whatever, you will find in the parsha because it's there, and you just have to look for it because you will absolutely kind of find it, whatever. So the kind of the conviction that it's there if you're looking for it. And I what I tend to do for drasha is I give quite a few parsha classes during the week. And I try not to just merely give my drasha as kind of like a speechified version of the shendo or one of the point from the parsha. That's sometimes how it works out. Nowadays, I kind of know, okay, that's it. I got my drasha. I got my drasha. I know what I'm going to say. That insight, that comment. Last week, I'm just give an example, whatever. I was preparing a parsha shir on Amalek, Vayavo Amalek, at the end of Beshalach, and I saw an Ibn Ezra who says that the Giva, the hill that Moshe Rabbeinu stood on, was Har Sinai. That was it. Boom. This then I kind of knew, and it unpacked, it unfurled. It's Amalek. That means Amalek was trying to stop Har Sinai. That means that their war with us and the rishus of Amalek is an attempt to prevent ethical monotheism, the Jewish kind of wrote it from that moment, kind of wrote itself. It was a bar mitzvah, made it even easier, but it kind of even wrote itself from that kind of flash. Oh, this is it. And that's kind of how I go. Years ago, actually, since you asked about Metzora, to turn Metzora, found a piece. I'm kind of, where did you study, by the way? Where's your...
So I went to Royers in Washington Heights for high school. And then in Israel, I was in Or Sameach for a while. And I was also in Lakewood, a branch of Lakewood in Eretz Israel.
I remember that. Right, Lakewood, yeah. Lakewood East.
Lakewood East, exactly. And then I was in the Or Lagola program. I went back to do the outreach training. And then I've been in a few different community kollels in California and Columbus.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Hey there, fellow podcast listeners. There's a secret that great public speakers know. Did you know there's a method for cutting straight through to an audience's heart, grabbing their attention and holding it, and making a memorable impact with your presentation? The best speakers in the world utilize it, and now you can too, every time you get up to speak. Download your free Maggid Method of Public Speaking template at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. The Maggid Method will teach you how to find your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, manage people's attention, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience. Go to maggidmethod.com and download your free copy now. Now let's get back to the program.
So I study a lot of kind of Bush, Yeshiva Har Etzion Torah. Even though I didn't study there, I actually now go in the summers to study there. So I sort of devour their parts. It's kind of the insights, a literary reading of the Parsha, reading the Shutoshel Mikra, and discovering kind of depth and insight. It's kind of where I am, and at least until very, very recently. And came across one year on Parshas Metzora, an insight of Professor Yoni Grossman, who's profound, amazing Tanakh scholar and tzaddik as well, and about how about how Metzora represents kind of the notion that of sacrifice, of the Tazria is a kind of a death experience, and Metzora represents the necessity to make korbanot in order for the Metzora, the person who's had saras, to be able to come back alive, to live again. And Tazria Metzora always falls around, or invariably falls around Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaTzmut kind of time. And it's just the relevance just screamed itself. Shoah, Tkuma, Yom HaTzmaut, Yom HaZikaron. I just kind of, just screamed it. Like, what are you talking about, Tazria Metzora? This is the most relevant Parsha. I could, listen to this. There's nothing more relevant, nothing more insightful about that, whatever. So the ability to kind of find that, and it's almost always there. It's almost always there.
You have to trust. Yeah.
But not every Parsha has to be, I think you kind of have to link it more or less to the Parsha, whatever, but not everything has to be kind of a deep dive into the Parsha. I would have given the same speech about Israel in the weeks after October 7th, or whichever parsha they would have been, as it happens to be. And we all, I think, marveled that all the way through Sefer Bereshit, and in fact through Shemot, Bo, and Vaera as well, and B'Shalach, the every parsha is directly relevant to the Matzav in Israel. Please God, by the time we get to Truma to Tava, we'll be talking about, building the Mikdash, etc. But very often, as I say, sometimes there are times like this where the relevance just kind of writes itself. Other times you find it and you can't find it. It's clearly harder sometimes, for sure.
Yeah.
One more thought about that, just in case of many years. I'm not going to name the name, although it's a public statement that I probably wouldn't mind being named, whatever. But a number of years ago, when I came to the shul, and I guess I was trying to establish my reputation, to a synagogue, certainly back in those days, still very much wanted to regard itself as a place of modern orthodoxy. Nowadays, we just think yourself as a shul. In those days, it was still very much, we're leading modern orthodox, whatever that means, whatever. So there was certainly pressure on me to try and self-impose pressure, perhaps, to feel that I needed to say something significant, something smart every week, something intelligent, something, putting down kind of markers, whatever. And at a certain point, my one son and then daughter's son, who actually learns in the Kollel and BMG himself in Lakewood, he actually said to my wife, "Why does Abba hate Judaism so much?" I was always pointing out problems in the Jewish community. If there were Haredim who were arrested for fraud, whatever, which is something important to speak about, I would speak about that all that. I wanted to show that I wasn't afraid, or that this is modern orthodoxy, whatever. The messages were basically becoming like attack messages, negative messages, and somehow or other, and they weren't really sad. I mean, getting riled up, and you tell them, Rabbi, one or two drushes from that era before really Facebook, when going viral meant being forwarded with emails. When you remember, you used to get those little forward arrows, so a drush I gave on Madoff scandal, and a drush I gave about the spitting when they were spitting on those little girls in Bet Shemesh, drushes that I would still absolutely stand by. They should have been exceptions rather than the rule. And at a certain point, I was at an Azkara, I think it was a shloshim for somebody, and a very, very prominent modern Orthodox rabbi made a comment along the lines of, my speeches are normally, setting to rights the problem of modern orthodoxy, the problems of modern orthodoxy. And I thought to myself, why am I problematizing Judaism? I don't want to come, what is my message? To tell people that I'm more moral, more ethical than everybody else. I don't want the community who's not as bought in as I am to, ins and outs and institutions of Orthodox Judaism, to walk away from, if there's so many problems with the Jewish community, 1 week the rabbi is talking about sexism, the next week he's talking about fraud, the next week he's talking about racism, he's talking about violence, the next week he's talking about this and intolerance and converts, etc. All of those important. Rabbis have to be fearless. But, if all I have to tell you is how big a problem orthodoxy is, then you've given my answer. You've answered the question. Why should I? Why you're hardly inspiring me. And there is a responsibility to both be true and to know and keep your powder dry and know when to use it, and never be a controversialist for the sake of being a controversialist and just, tilt at windmills or look for the most, relevant topic in the news, whatever, and certainly not to be just the headline grabbing rabbi. But at the same time, what people are looking for from a speech or drush, I think, is wisdom and inspiration and warmth and light and and Torah, and they need to be. And in fact, in the light of Madoff, I gave a drasha about burning Madoff, and it was very, very important. Madoff was probably before you were born, a long time ago. And then I gave a follow-up drasha, and a lady in the community actually asked to speak to me. And there was a lady who'd been involved in my hiring. So I, took this lady very, very seriously. And she said, Rabbi, you have no idea how much money we have lost in the last few months. And I come to shul. She said, I needed a shul, because I spoke out about ostentatious simchas. He said, we needed a shoulder. I needed a shoulder to cry on, and instead you gave me an elbow. And I thought to myself, that is fascinating because whatever I am talking about from an ethical, moral high horse, somebody else who's done nothing wrong needs a hug, an embrace, and support, and not harangue. So you gotta choose very wisely and carefully. And I try to to give stern drushes far, far, far less than I used to, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like people feel okay approaching you about how they receive your
Not
words.
always, more or less, people just
Yeah,
kind of vote with their feet, whatever. But it's
yeah, that's true.
and I have to say, and it is kind of thrilling. I remember back in the day, Rabbi Isaac Bernstein, Zichroni Livracha, Rabbi Emmanuel Bernstein's father, Rabbi Bernstein of England, was Irish originally, and I actually had been at the Jewish Center. I think before Rabbi Schachter came to the Jewish Center, I'd been the rabbi there. Was a unbelievable orator, and I remember, even though I remember friends of mine when I was already religious would say if something big happened in the news, people would say, "Oh, we're all going to hear Bernstein the Shabbos." Like people would go to his show because they knew they would be like a fire and brimstone message or whatever. So I have to say that I know that since October 7th, a lot of people have been coming to shul just because we all need community and the chizuk, that the davening, the tehillim, etc., the praying is whatever. I've noticed even within the shul, there are certain people who are coming to the minyan, the main minyan where I speak, because they feel that I speak to them and, more importantly, for them. And I often will start a drasha and say, "You're not crazy. You're not crazy. This is our message, and this is who we are, and this is our case, and this is the right whatever." And sometimes, especially nowadays, kind of a reinforcement is so incredibly important. We feel alone, but we're not crazy, and we will prevail. That's one form or another, almost every speech I give right now.
Mhm. Validating their feelings.
Yeah, validating and tell them to hang in there and to remain as active and engaged as possible, and to
Yeah. So I look back at some of your sermons. I guess some of the ones that were printed, not so recent, but it seems like a lot of the themes are still relevant: anti-Semitism, morality, honesty in business, things like that. Uh, it struck me that these are big issues. You speak on a lot of big issues: gay marriage, women in Judaism.
Wow,
Women
you've got a real archive. I don't even know where these are, but good. Right,
most of them I found on Times of Israel.
right.
That
Oh, okay. And I lost the login for that blog, so I haven't updated it for years, and I literally lost the login. So I tend
Yeah,
to post my droshes either now by email. I got in the habit of emailing a lot during COVID, and then posting on Facebook.
yeah, yeah. So, but those were a lot of big
Yeah,
topics. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that I saw were uh, making sense of terror attacks. Unfortunately, it's still
right,
relevant.
right.
Unity. Speaking about unity of people on Yom
Right.
Kippur.
That's a kind of a self-selecting thing, whatever, because I would only post drushes on big topics on
Uh-huh.
Times of Israel. And my shtickle chiddush
Tazria Torah.
on Yaakov Avinu, whatever. I tended not to write. And at a certain, and I'm going to come back. Yeah, so I'll let you make your points. Yeah, or your question.
Yeah. Well, my question is I guess you started to answer it, but I guess that's not every Shabbos, week in,
Right.
week out. Those are the big messages. Those are the big sermons. Um, when you have those types of messages, the big ones, is the message is first, and then you look for the Torah to support it, or is it born out of the Torah from that event, from that occasion?
That's a great question. I'm not, I spoke, and I'm not, I remember there were some people who even sort of surprised I was willing to be sort of candid, but um, over let's say business ethics thing, or after the Barry Frindell scandal or something like that, where I'm going to it's not exactly. I know that's not what you're asking, but it's not. I'm going to read the parsha and actually come to the conclusion that, oh my gosh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm on the wrong side of this issue. What have you? But so very often, yeah, if I'm speaking about business ethics or what have you, there's enough in the Torah that portrays honesty. If it's this week's parsha, so I'll link it to Law Tignov. If it happens to be, Parshas Pekudei, so I'll link it to the general accountability of of the Jewish people, whatever. If it happens to be in Parshas, who knows what, to Tzaveh, so then it's going to be kind of more of a stretch, what have you. But yeah, but it's not that on these topics I'm not, teaching parsha per se or filtering or moderating the message I'm giving because I'm convinced, because I'm right. If I thought it was wrong, I wouldn't give the message. And if I, and I'm and it's a kind of a larger, wider kind of thing. Whatever. I think that Bet Shemesh, the curse of violent extremism. I don't even know if it's on time. It was one of the first logs, brushes that I gave. Whatever. It's still in the old shul. I remember it was a long time ago now. I remember. I think at the end of the day, the only hook I had for the parsha was that there's a midrash or not a midrash, a tradition that a Sarah B'Tevet was a day of Mashiach Yosef. So at the very end of this drasha, it was almost, it was sometime in early Tevet that I gave this drasha, must have been post Hanukkah. So I just, that was it. That was the only Torah in that particular drasha, whatever. But again, those are the exceptions rather than the rules. At a certain point, by the way, just my own kind of shifting, there's a lot of, I'm not really Hasidically inclined in the, as much as anybody else. I like a nice vort, a nice, warm, kind of happy minyan kind of davening from time to time, or a nice vort, whatever. Actually, when I was in South Africa and they were speaking about Chomer Ledrusha, what I used to prepare, whatever, at that time, my go-to sefer for a Devar Torah was the Chidushi Harim. Just found the Chidushi Harim on the the Parsha was pretty much usually, I would say 7.5 times out of 10 had something absolutely golden, whatever. And I remember all the rabbis in South Africa kind of making a note to, I think that this foreign store sold out of Chidushi Harim within days, whatever. But, we have our sources, whatever. But I'm generally speaking a Hasidic thinker, and even though some of my younger rabbis that I work with, interns, assistant rabbis, are into Neo Hasidus or whatever, but at a certain point, it was even prior to COVID. There was a shift in my drushes, and I don't really know what prompted it. But I started speaking much more. I'm not a therapist. I started speaking much more about emotional issues, the feelings. I could almost have written a book. I didn't. I don't really write or publish my drushes. They're a kind of ephemera. But I really kind of, and I wasn't doing this thing of putting the avos on the psychiatrist's couch, whatever, and analyzing them. I was just talking about, what did Yaakov Avinu feel? Actually, Yaakov Avinu is the most amazing figure. He talks of the word fear and yira and, come up in relationship to Yaakov almost all his life. At the, v'yetze Yaakov miyod, v'yira Yaakov miyod, v'yetze lo, and at the end of his life, a malach hagoel oti mikol ra. Like Yaakov is intensely aware of kind of his emotional state and his, his battles and his fears and his victories, what have you. And came across a midrash that talks about the malachim olim v'yordim bo. The midrash said one day, and the midrash says bo internally. It was a internal struggle of Yaakov Avinu about whether or not he would succeed or fail, whether he would take courage or take flight. And, I just, these ideas, and somebody actually commented, like, wow, I see you're really talking about kind of, maybe I was just, doing self-therapy or what have you by in the pulpit, whatever. I once heard, as I mentioned, I go to the Gush in the summers. So I once heard a Rav Moshe Lichtenstein, Rabbi Soloveitchik's grandson, made a comment. He was speaking together with his mother, Dr. Tova Lichtenstein, at a panel discussion about chinuch and education. He made a comment. He said that the Rav, Rabbi Soloveitchik, would never talk about his inner private feelings, never discuss his private feelings, unless he was speaking to an audience of 400 people. And I because some of his speeches are you see the transcripts of some of his speeches or articles where he discusses the loneliness and bereavement. So we didn't talk about that privately, but in front of an audience, he would kind of bare his soul, whatever. I could very much relate to that. So for whatever reason, I found myself talking about emotional issues, how Yitzchak Avinu must have felt, what Rivka, marriage to Rivka, what it meant by Nachem, Yitzchak, Rivka, after Sarah Imo, what that must have felt. I just kind of fell into that. And then came COVID, and that became, even on Zoom drushes or whatever, much more important as well. So at a certain point, I kind of shifted gear and tried to not try to deliberately, because it sounds kind of coercive, but I wasn't deliberately trying to touch people. I was trying to give brushes to people about things that they could relate to on a personal level. I think
More
we're
human.
all aware that possibly the most important thing we have to face is our own struggles or our own needs, and and that was important as well. I think hearing discourses on Maimonidean ethics, whatever, are less important right now in the world than a sort of sense of not just pop psychology, but a sense of here's something that you can relate to and actually not get fired up, which is one model of drosha, which I still occasionally do. But here's something that can warm you up a little bit. You just bring a little bit of warmth into your tired neshama, and that's kind of a new direction that I took. Certainly pre-COVID was something I was doing more and more.
Yeah. I have just a couple more questions for you. I read that there's a story that you tell at Shivas about how when you were at the Shiva for your father, that you were brought shortly thereafter to meet Rabbi Sachs. I'm curious if you could retell that story.
Yes, I tell people whenever we go for a walk around the block after a Shiva, because my father, all of a sudden, died very suddenly at the age of 58. And my wife and I were newly married. We were in actually our Shana Rishona when he passed away. And it was extremely difficult and hard, as you can imagine. And Rabbi Sachs had become, I mentioned Rabbi Sachs became chief rabbi while I was in Smicha. So I sat Shiva in my hometown of Glasgow, Scotland. We returned to London for a few days before going back to Efrat. And I was on a scholarship program to become a rabbi. And my smicha was being funded by the British Jewish community. So word came through that Rabbi Sachs had heard about my loss and wanted to meet with me. I think I must have met him once or twice before, but certainly didn't know very well. And I remember going into his office and he's saying, my name is Shaul, but in those days my name was Paul. And he said, Paul, we've heard such great things about you. We're going to, you're going to, so exciting, your career in the rabbinate. We're here to assist you in any way. And I just listened to him and I thought, what are you talking about? That's not true anymore. That's my dad died. It was so like dislocating that I didn't know who I was anymore, or whether any assumption. It wasn't like like back in the day, oh, I'm going to have to drop out of school and support the family. It wasn't that. I just nothing seemed real anymore. Whatever, I'd lost sight of my future. So I felt it just wasn't true anymore. And I often reflect on that. And I kind of use that to sort of tell Avelim how dislocating, grief can be, and how you just sort of feel that you don't know which is up and down and north and south, whatever. And it's a memory that I've shared a lot of times. Yeah.
Yeah, very powerful. I want to ask you about, you referenced earlier about the difference between wartime, crisis types of drushas and other drushas. So maybe elaborate on that a little bit, if you don't mind.
So at a certain point, last year, going back this time last year, Israel was really, really divided. And I strayed and really paid the price, because we didn't really talk about this so much, but some of the speeches that I gave were popular with 90% of the audience and deeply unpopular with 10% of the audience. I'm going back, 8 years ago, the election cycle, 2016, Trump, I didn't speak out deliberately against, Donald Trump, but, when the world began going crazy, Orthodox communities became very, very split. There are some communities that are echo chambers. Many Orthodox communities are right-wing echo chambers. Many left-wing communities or liberal communities are left-wing echo chambers. I'm blessed with a shul on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. It's an Orthodox shul, but a diverse shul, where political divisions of the American, certainly the American Jewish community, go right through the shul, and people left the shul. People became alienated, not because of each other's politics. And sometimes a message that I felt everybody thinks a rabbi should speak out on important issues, but nobody wants to hear the rabbi speak out on a topic that they disagree with. Nobody. And I remember once after the Parkland shooting, I was in Israel. I'm from the UK. People don't have guns. It once happened that they showed up at school in Scotland, and the entire country they banned guns. Everyone had their guns taken away from them. So after Parkland shooting, I was so outraged. I got up and I gave a drasha. I'd been in Israel. I held up a Kinder Egg, which at those times were illegal in the UK, in America, and I said these are banned in America because the FDA is concerned that your child could choke on the little toy, but assault rifles are legal. And I gave a drasha which 95% of people applauded, and 5% were horrified. Why is the rabbi speaking out against the Constitution Amendment? He's not American. He doesn't understand whatever. So I realized that politics was something of very delicate. And the one thing that I'm constitutionally, maybe even terrified of, is kind of machloket. And it's a kind of, if I'm going to speak out on a big issue, I used to not sleep beforehand, before or after, because knowing that there are going to be some people who will really disagree with my message is something which is still very, very hard for me. So I started speaking about politics, and then I started speaking a lot less about politics. I realized there was no upside. Then all the divisions in Israel came, and even a call for unity could be paradoxically polarizing. So I remember last year, Vayakel Pekud, I think it was Parshas HaChodesh, Vayakel Pekud, it was one of those 3-minute drushas where I literally said, time me, I'm going to speak for 3 minutes, and I did. And I was able to kind of explain why no more politics. We need Shabbos. There was a beautiful idea from Rabbi Sachs about Shabbat, why sometimes it comes at the end of the week, sometimes it comes at the very beginning, like in Parshas Vayakel, sometimes Bereishit comes at the very end. Humans need Shabbat. We look forward to it. Shabbos is too important to waste on politics. And that was kind of the default that I kind of reached at. What's happening in Israel is important, but we can't solve it. We're just here to talk about Torah. When October 7th came, of course, people need to be helped. I'll say there are people who've left other shuls and come to our shul because they just don't feel that the other shuls are caring enough about Israel. That's partly the Tehillim and whether the Tehillim, which are being said, are perfunctory or really the focus of the Tefillah, but also the sense of there is nothing more. I know I said a few months ago that there is nothing more important in the Jewish world right now than Israel and our attachment to it. And this is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be times that we will all despair, and we have to remain, focused and plugged in and caring about Israel. So that's I can't imagine right now not giving a drasha that is not substantially about Israel, and people want to hear it. They need to hear it, and that's a feedback loop that I'm getting.
It's so ironic because I came across I guess Haaretz had emailed a bunch of Orthodox rabbis before the high holidays and asked, "What do you plan to talk about Israel during the service?"
Haaretz or Forward? Forward often does that.
Was it Forward? Okay, yeah.
Could be. Maybe it was Haaretz as well, but Forward often do that.
And so I saw a quote by you. It said, "I'm happy to go on record as saying that I have no intention of speaking about politics all during the upcoming high holiday season. My sense is that people more than ever are craving meaning, spirituality, and renewed relationships with Hashem and humanity. And speaking of politics,
I said that. That's me. I said that.
That it was attributed to you.
Okay, no, makes sense.
Yeah.
Right, but right now, all of that is true, but it's coming from a place of Jewish pride. And I'm not getting up and talking about Nasrallah this, and let me tell you, Biden did. I'm not spitting out, armchair political analysis, and trying to explain how the Torah gives us it's mistazek us for the long road. Actually, just one example, then we're done. I know your time is out, whatever. But I actually, again, it's one of those things. As soon as you see it, it's sufficient. That writes a drosha. Parshas Vayera, Ani Kel Shakai. So I actually it kind of occurred to me that, and then I went looking and I found proof. Kel Shakai is the name used in Bereshit for when people stand all by themselves and have Hashem with them. And it's like, or again, when Avram is told to do bris milah, and there's actually Rashbam says this, or Siftei Chachamim says this explicitly. Avram says to Hashem, what the whole world is going to laugh at me, and nobody's going to want to convert to Judaism. And Hashem says, "Ani kel shakai hitalech lefanai v'yatamim," and it's the name of God that God uses when we think we're all alone, and Hashem says, "I'm enough. I'm enough. You're enough for me in this world, and I'm enough for you in this world." So that's Torah, but it's also the message that even if we are alone, and we're not, even if we're alone, Hashem is enough for us. That's what Ani Kel Shakai means. So again, I find the Torah almost, more and more relevant to the matter at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so last thing I would say, I always ask this to people: if you had two pieces of advice to give to new rabbis, emerging rabbis, and they're about to embark on their speaking career, their pulpit career, what pieces of advice would you give? And I know you probably mentor rabbinic interns, so but if you had to narrow it down to two things, the two most important things.
Okay, so the first one without question is you don't care about what you're saying. Nobody else will. And that's the most clearest thing. I remember hearing somebody who'd been to a Rav in Brooklyn with a Shaila, and very clearly the Rav was like too busy. And person came out and remarked to a friend who I knew, if the Rav doesn't care, why should I? And you will never, when rabbi, there are some rabbis, and we spoke about those kind of pulpits or interactions where the rabbi's got a lifetime of drushes, and people aren't paying attention anyway. So just dial in an old drusha. The point that you stop caring about the message you're giving is the point at which people won't even begin listening to you. That is actually the first, second, third, and fourth piece of advice. If you care, so then you can learn. You will learn how to communicate that care. But if you don't care, then it doesn't matter how much of a genius you are, or how profound the idea is, or even how polished your speaking is. It will always fall flat. So if you don't, and sometimes you get up, you just listen to rabbis who are just, they know that nobody's listening and they're not putting in any effort, and it's profound. Oh, and the last thing, I actually had to share this with my wife when she started giving, speeches or teaching, whatever. Sometimes people are incredibly nervous before speaking. I used to be tremendously nervous, and I always tell bar mitzvah boys, if you're not nervous, nerves are a good sign. It means that you're really going to focus and do your best, as long as they're not disabling. But one second, I just lost the train of my thought. Whatever. What was I saying? One second.
You were telling your wife.
What did you say? I told my wife that in fact the audience is on your side. Don't look at them as people are. There is nothing more kind of excruciating than listening to a speaker who is just going down terribly. And we kind of get that. So you kind of get up and feel, very often people at the very beginning kind of feel like they're looking at me, whatever, they're tripping on it's hostile audience. And Shul is not a hostile audience. They want you to succeed. You're going to make it. And when you hear a new speaker, you're a little on guard, and then 20, 30 seconds in, you realize that it's fine. Everybody relaxes. Oh, thank God, this is not going to be awkward or embarrassing, whatever. So I often reflect that and point out to them, they're on your side. They want you to succeed. Do them a chesed and make it a really enjoyable speech, because everybody wants to enjoy a speech. Nobody's looking for you to trip up, whatever. So, you can't do anything about the nerves, but just know that they're all in your head. It's not like they're gunning for you, whatever. So, it's important too.
There was a comedian, I always quote this. I actually never enjoyed his comedy, but Richard Pryor. So he was a comedian, and he gave a concert, and he used to get very nervous. And he would say at the beginning, I remember him saying that, I'm so nervous. I want to succeed, and I know you want me to succeed too. And that's,
exactly that.
It's not me versus you. It's
100%. And sometimes people feel maybe in the old day, remember once speaking at a wedding, a chuppah, it was very kind of 5 times crowd. And I gave a little word under the chuppah, whatever, about, Noah, whatever. And then somebody, and I think they might have been kidding around, but I got the impression this is what, some genre of Orthodox Jews in our country could be like, whatever. He started kind of like shtuching me, like, well, why did you say this? And Medrash says, nah, there are some people who go into the, looking to trip up the rabbi. There was a British author, David Cotter, he wrote Bible, he wrote a bunch of books back in the day, Jewish author, David Cotter. Somebody went up to once and said, I found a mistake. I found a typo in one of your books. And he said to them, did you enjoy any other part of the book as much as that? So there are people who unfortunately are like gunning for the rabbi's an Amar, I'm going to show he doesn't know what he's talking about. But I think that model of Balabas is really, at least in my circles, I haven't come across that kind of that mode for a long, long, long time. And I always tell my rabbinic interns and anybody else who listen to me, they want you to succeed, and you're doing them a favor by giving them a good speech. Then it's a good time will be had by all.
Thank you so much. That's a great stopping point. Is there anywhere that people should, if they want to learn more, anything? And you said you don't publish your sermons really.
Well, I put a lot of them up I often put them on Facebook, and I'm actually going to start putting them up maybe I should start putting them up on Times of Israel again a little bit more, whatever. But if I do put anything anywhere, I make a link to it on Facebook. So people are very, very welcome to friend me or follow me on Facebook, Shaul Robinson.
Twitter, X or whatever.
Not so much Twitter. Yeah. I'm giving a series of classes right now being the end of January or February 2024, on Am Yisrael Chai, 5 lectures on just Jewish pride. Like why do the Jewish people exist? Last night's lecture was, what has Judaism taught the world? Like basic lessons of Jewish pride that sometimes even, we ourselves don't know or are aware of, the miracle of Jewish survival, etc. So I'm putting them up on YU Torah. I intend to put more stuff on YU Torah. I've got about 25 lectures up there in total. But I intend to put more stuff up there. But those are like not drushes, but like our like classes.
And so people can find you on a given Shabbos.
Best of all, come to Lincoln Square Synagogue, 180 Amsterdam Avenue, New York City. Almost always a gala kiddush after davening. Amazing davening, warm community. Great to see people.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. I hope you're finding value in all the insightful conversations coming your way, and I'm grateful for all the time we get to spend together. Now, I have a small favor to ask, one that can make a big difference. Your feedback is invaluable to me. By taking a moment to rate and review this podcast, you're not only showing your support, but also helping it reach new heights. Picture this: more reviews means more visibility. More visibility means more incredible guests lining up to share their stories and expertise with you. So, if you're enjoying what you're hearing, how about making some magic happen? Scroll down, tap that rating, jot down a few words. It's that simple. Your action today can pave the way for even greater experiences tomorrow. Thanks for your support. Bye-bye.